All right, hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. Currently, we are in Deuteronomy chapter 14. Now, the next few chapters, as well as, of course, what we have been studying, Moses' farewell address, he is re-emphasizing, he's repeating commands. And as I said in another study, keep this in mind that when we talk, as we're reading it, we get the impression that this is all in one instance, but it's not. That the commands that we're constantly seeing repeated over and over again, remember, it took place over a 40-year period of time. But not only that, but it is also depending on who was being addressed. So, for example, in the Exodus, the commands Moses is giving, Moses is given the commands by God in a general way. In the book of Leviticus, Leviticus is pretty much the handbook of the Levites, the priests. And then in the book of Numbers, we see that there is a 38-year gap. And so Moses is sort of, again, repeating the commands to the new generation. And in this case, as Moses is repeating these commands, it's his last day, and this is what's really heavy on his heart and on his mind as the people prepare to go into the promised land. But keep this in mind, they're going into the promised land without the lawgiver himself, Moses, without the one who was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights in the presence of God. All right, so this is why we see that sometimes these things are being repeated. There are specific purposes for it. So let's get into it. Deuteronomy chapter 14, and it says, now, verse 1, you are the sons of the Lord your God, and do not cut yourselves and make a bald spot on your head on the behalf of the dead. Now keep this in mind that this is not forbidding tattoos as we know it, but tattoos for pagan purposes. And as he says, like for example, on the behalf of the dead, this was a pagan practice. Verse 2, for you are holy people belonging to the Lord your God. The Lord has chosen you to be his own possession out of all the peoples on the face of the earth. Now this understand that God is the one who has set aside Israel as his own possession. Now, not a race, but a nation. Now, they have sinned. Currently, they're out of covenant relationships with God. But this is going to be something that will be fulfilled later, okay? And I can't help but wonder too why people hate the Jews so much. I'm thinking spiritually, this is one of the reasons why. That maybe I don't know. Anyway, verse 3: you are not to eat any detestable things. These are the animals you may eat: the ox, the sheep, the goat, the deer, the gazelle, the roe, deer, wild goat, explode antelope, and the mountain sheep. So we can eat these. Verse 6: you may eat any animal that have hooves divided into two and chews the cud, but among the ones that chew the cud and have divided hooves, you are not to eat these: the camel, the hare, the hare means rabbit, the hyrax, though they chew the cud, they do not have hooves. They are unclean for you. The pig, though it have hooves, it does not chew the cud, is unclean for you. Now I want to say this: the pig often gets almost like the only one that is like the bad pig, that if you eat pig. And by the way, it is used as a bad example in scripture. In other words, you would see that the pig. But also keep in mind, there's a lot of animals that Israel was not allowed to eat. And I will remind you that this is Israel who was forbidden to eat this, not the world. You must not eat their meat or touch their carcasses. You may eat everything from the water that hath fins and scales, but you may not eat anything that does not have fins and scales. It is unclean to you. You may eat every clean bird, but these are the ones you may not eat: the eagle, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite, any kind of falcon, any kind of raven, the ostrich, the short-eared owl, the gull, any kind of hawk, the little owl, the long-eared owl, the white owl, the desert owl, almost any kind of owl, really, right? The osprey, the cormorant, some of these names I don't even know what they are. The stork, any kind of heron, the hoopoe, and the bat. Verse 19: all winged insects are unclean for you. They must not be eaten. So if you like grasshoppers, you can't eat those. You may eat every clean flying creature. You are not to eat any carcass. You may give it to the temporary residents living within your gates, but he may eat it, or you may sell it to the foreigner. For you are holy people, belonging to the Lord your God. You must not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Okay. Each year you are to set aside the 10th of all the produce grown in your fields. You are to eat a 10th of your grain, the wine, and the oil, and the firstborn of your herd and the flock, in the presence of Yahweh your God, at the place where he chooses to have his name dwell, so that you may always learn to fear the Lord your God. Now this place won't be built for another 480 years, the temple at Jerusalem. Okay. Verse 24: but if the distance is too great for you to carry it, since the place where Yahweh your God chooses to put his name is too far away from you, and since the Lord your God has blessed you, then exchange it for money. Take the money in your hand and go to the place the Lord your God chooses. Now, meaning to appear at Jerusalem. All right, verse 26. You may spend the money on anything you want: cattle, sheep, wine, beer, or anything you desire. You are to feast there in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice with your family. Do not neglect the Levite within your gates, since he has no portion or inheritance among you. We'll get to that a little later in the chapter. Verse 28. At the end of every 3 years, bring 10th of your produce for that year, and store it within your gates. Then the Levites, who has no portion or inheritance among you, the foreigner and the fatherless and the widow within your gates, may eat it and be satisfied, and the Lord your God will bless you in all the works in your hands to do. To keep this in mind, taking care of the poor was a part of God's plan. There's a lot of discussion today about how we should do it and if we should do it. But keep this in mind, God always made this provision for the poor. All right. Chapter 15, it said at the end of every 7 years you must cancel debt. Now, we don't have that law, right? But anyway, verse 2. This is how to cancel debt. Every creditor is to cancel what he has lent to his neighbor. He is not to collect anything from his neighbor, brother, because the Lord's release of debts has been proclaimed. You may collect something from a foreigner, but you must forgive whatever your brother owes you. Okay. Excuse me. There will be no poor among you. However, because the Lord is certain to bless you in the land the Lord your God has given you to possess as an inheritance, if only you obey the Lord your God and are careful to follow every one of his commands I'm giving you today. When the Lord your God blesses you as he has promised, you will lend to many nations and not borrow. You will rule over many nations, but they will not rule over you. Unfortunately, Israel will never see this because they will violate God's commands. Now, kind of interesting, of course, too, no Israelite was to be poor under the blessings of God. Verse 7, if there is a poor person among you, one of your brothers within any of your gates in the land of the land the Lord your God has given you, you must not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards your poor brother. Now you may go, is this a contradiction because you just said there will not be any poor among you? That's providing that they keep the commands of the Lord. There'll be sometimes people who individually will fall under the judgment of God. But notice what he's saying right here, that you're to keep your heart towards your brother. Verse 8. Instead, you are to open your hand to him and freely loan him enough for whatever he needs he has. Be careful that there isn't this wicked thought in your heart. The seventh year, the year of cancellation, debt is near, and you are stingy towards your brother to give him nothing. He will cry out to the Lord against you, and you will be guilty. Give him and don't have a stingy heart. When you give, because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all of the work and in everything that you're doing. Now, this becomes the reason why you don't have to be stingy. There are a lot of people who are stingy and greedy. And the reason why you could do this is because, remember, God himself was promising the Israelites that he would bless them. Verse 11, for there will never cease to be poor in the land. That is why I'm commanding you. You must willingly open your hand to your afflicted and poor brothers in your hand. So the truth of the matter is, even though there's a promise, right, if they were to follow God's commands, they would be blessed. However, that's not the reality. And so he says, hey, there's always going to be poor. Jesus would often also quote this. There's always going to be poor, so take care of the poor. Have a heart to take care of the poor. Verse 12, if your fellow Hebrew, a man or woman, is sold to you and serves you 6 years, you must set him free in the 7th year. When you set him free, do not send him away empty-handed. Give generously to him from your flock, your threshing floor, and your winepress. You are to give him whatever the Lord your God has blessed you with. Remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord your God redeemed you. This is why I'm giving you this command today. But if your slave says to you, I don't want to leave you. Now, before I get to that, let me say this. The slaves were to be set free at a certain time, especially if they were a Jewish slave. In other words, a Jewish person would never was to hold a fellow Jewish person, okay, as a slave. Now, if you wanted to make an application to that in America, how would that pan out? You were never to hold a fellow American as a slave. And I'll leave it at that because a lot could be said on that. The very fact that an entire civil war was fought to keep slavery. But I do digress. Verse 16, but if your slave says to you, I don't want to leave you because he loves you and your family and is well off with you, take an awl and pierce through his ear into the door, and he will become your slave for life. Also, treat your female slave the same way. Do not regard it as a hardship when you set him free, because he worked for you 6 years, worth twice the wages of a hired hand. Then the Lord your God will bless you in everything you do. Now, the New Testament writers, believe it or not, use this what's called the when they talk about verse 17, verse 16, verse 17, the bond slave who sold themselves, you could say, who willingly, because they loved their masters. The New Testament writers did the same. They called themselves bond slaves of Jesus Christ. All right. It says, you must consecrate to the Lord your God every firstborn male produce by your herd or flock. You are not to put the firstborn of your ox to work or shear the firstborn of your flock. Each year you and your family are to eat it before the Lord your God and place it in the place the Lord chooses. But if there is a defective animal, lame or blind, and at a serious defect, you must not sacrifice it to the Lord your God. Yes, people would do that. They figure, why sacrifice good flock when we can get rid of the lame? Now, verse 22, eat it within your gates, both the unclean person and the clean may eat it, as though it were the gazelle or deer. You must not eat its blood, pour it on the ground like water. All right, so in other words, God says, do not give me your cheap feast. Now I'm going to read, go through chapter 16. This is again was the festivals. There were 3 festivals in which all of the males were to appear every year. Chapter 16, verse 1 says, "Observe the month of Ebit." This was their first year, their January. Excuse me. "And celebrate the Passover to the Lord your God, because the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt by night in the month of Ebit, or the first month. Sacrifice to Yahweh your God a Passover animal from the herd or flock in the place where the Lord chooses to have his name to dwell there." Now you notice you keep making mention of this. This is going to be Jerusalem, and the temple will be built in Jerusalem. However, it won't happen for another 480 years. Verse 3. "You must not eat leavened bread with it for 7 days. You are to eat unleavened bread with it, the bread of hardship, because you left the land of Egypt in a hurry, so that you may remember for the rest of your life the days you left the land of Egypt." Unleavened bread is any kind of seasoning, any kind of yeast, flour, or whatever. Leavened bread is any kind of yeast. So the unleavened is you're supposed to eat the bread with no kind of seasoning in it. Verse 4. I said, "No yeast to be found anywhere in your territory for 7 days, and none of the meat that you sacrifice in the evening of the first day is to remain until morning. You are not to sacrifice the Passover animal in any of the towns the Lord your God has given you. You must only sacrifice the Passover animal at the place where Yahweh your God chooses to have his name dwell. Do this in the evening, at the sunset, and at the time, the day that you depart from Egypt. You are to cook and eat it in the place the Lord your God chooses, and you are to return to your tent in the morning. You must eat the unleavened bread for 6 days. On the 7th day, there is to be a solemn assembly to the Lord your God, and you must not do any work. You are to count 7 weeks, counting from the time the sickle was first put to the string. This is the second, by the way, the second holiday. There were 3 holidays, remember, throughout the year, and this is during the harvest time. Verse 10. Verse 9 again. You are to count 7 weeks, counting the weeks from the time the sickle was put in the straining grain. You are to celebrate the festival of weeks to the Lord your God with the freewill offering that you give in proportion to how the Lord your God has blessed you. Rejoice before the Lord Yahweh your God in the place where he chooses to have his name dwell. Your son and your daughter, your male and your female slave, and the Levite within your gates, as well as the foreigner and the fatherless and the widow among you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Carefully follow these statutes. You are to celebrate the festival of booths for 7 days, when you gathered in everything from your threshing floor to your wine press. Now this would be the harvest, time. At the end of the harvest, it is verse 14. "Rejoice during the festival, you, your sons, your daughter, your male, female servants, as well as the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widows within your gates. You are to hold a 7-day festival to the Lord your God in the place he chooses, because the Lord your God will bless you in all of your produce and all of your work of your hands, and you will have abundant joys. All your males are to appear 3 times a year before the Lord your God in the place he chooses, at the festivals of unleavened bread, and the festivals of week, and the festivals of booths. No one is to appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every one must appear with a gift suited to his means, according to the blessing that the Lord your God has given you." Okay. All right. Verse 18. "Appoint judges and officials for your tribes and all your towns the Lord your God is giving you. They are to judge the people with righteous judgments. Do not deny justice and show partiality to anyone. Do not accept a bribe, for it blinds the eyes for it blinds the blind eye of the wise and twists the words of the righteous. Pursue justice and justice alone, so that you will live and possess the land the Lord your God is giving you." Now we talked about these things again, and again, righteousness is so important. And you know when you don't have righteous laws. We don't have to go into that. Verse 21, do not set up an asterisk of any kind of wood next to an altar you will build for the Lord your God. And do not set up a sacred pillar. The Lord your God hates them, meaning pagan worship. Now again, Israel was to, these commands, notice exhortations that he is given, were to be practiced. Moses is just kind of reminding them. Notice that he continually talks about remembering the suffering, the slavery. I say that for a reason. I'm not going to get into it. Look, I'll see you in the next study, guys. I believe it's chapter, I forgot, I think it's chapter 18. No, it's not chapter 18. Yes, chapter 18, next study. All right, I'll see you then.